Depending on the exact moment you are watching this, the United States national debt is sitting somewhere north of $35 trillion. It is a number so staggeringly large that the human brain cannot actually process it. We hear trillion and we think it's just a little bit more than billion. It isn't. If you traveled back in time 1 billion seconds, you would be in the year 1993. But if you traveled back in time 35 trillion seconds, you wouldn't be in the 1990s. You would be in the middle of the Ice Age, 30,000 years before the first human civilization was built. If you stacked 35 trillion $1 bills on top of each other, that stack wouldn't just reach the moon. It would reach the moon and back, 45 times. But the sheer size of the number isn't the real problem. We are used to big numbers in global finance. The problem, and the terrifying reality that mainstream economists are terrified to say out loud, is that the math no longer works. We have crossed a mathematical event horizon. For decades, politicians and central bankers have told you that the debt is manageable. They sell you a comforting story. As long as the GDP grows, we can borrow forever. They tell you that debt to GDP ratios are just academic metrics that don't affect your daily life. That is the $35 trillion lie. The truth is much simpler and much darker. The debt can never be paid back. It won't be paid back. The liability has grown too large for the tax base to support. And historically, when an empire reaches this stage of financial insolvency, there are only two ways out. Both of them involve the destruction of your wealth. Today, we are going to look at the cold, hard mechanics of the sovereign debt crisis. We are going to examine the history of empires, from Rome to revolutionary France, that tried to print their way out of doom. We will uncover how monetary policy is being weaponized against your savings. And ultimately, we are going to show you why the soft landing they keep promising is a myth. This isn't just about government budgets. This is about the value of the money in your pocket. If you want to understand the economic storm that is coming, you need to understand the history of debt. To understand why this situation is fatal, we have to look at the curve. For the first 2 centuries of American history, debt was utilized strictly for emergencies. The government borrowed heavily to fund the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World War II. But there was always an exit strategy. After the emergency ended, the spending stopped, austerity measures were introduced, and the debt was paid down. The balance sheet returned to normal. But in 1971, everything changed. When President Nixon ended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold, the discipline was removed. The dollar became a fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith. Suddenly, politicians realized they could fund endless wars and endless social programs without raising taxes. We began using debt not for emergencies, but for daily survival. Think of it like a household. If you earn $50,000 a year, but you spend $80,000, you have a deficit. You have to borrow the difference. That might work for a year or two, but next year, you have to pay interest on that debt. So, you have to borrow more just to pay the interest on what you borrowed last year. Eventually, the interest payments become larger than your grocery bill. Then, larger than your rent. This is what economists call a debt spiral or the doom loop. It is the point where the cost of the debt begins to consume the entire economy. The power of compound interest is often called the eighth wonder of the world, but when it works against you, it is a weapon of mass destruction. We are currently seeing the hockey stick moment of that exponential curve. It took the United States over 200 years to accumulate its first $1 trillion of debt. Today, we are adding a new $1 trillion to the debt pile roughly every 100 days. Right now, the US government is borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money it already borrowed. This is Ponzi finance. In 2024, interest payments on the national debt surpassed the entire defense budget. Let that sink in. The United States maintains the most expensive military machine in human history: aircraft carriers, fighter jets, bases in 80 countries. And yet, we are now spending more simply to service old debt than we are on the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines combined. This is the trap of exponential compounding. The more debt we have, the higher the interest payments. The higher the payments, the more we have to borrow. It is a mathematical feedback loop that only moves in one direction, up. And it moves up until the system breaks. This is not a political opinion. It is an arithmetic certainty. So, if the debt can't be paid through taxation or growth, what happens? Do we just declare bankruptcy? Does the US government just close up shop and sell off the national parks? No, because sovereign governments have a tool that you and I do not have. They have a printing press. They control the monetary policy. This brings us to our first historical lesson, the fall of Rome. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire faced a crisis that should sound very familiar. They had overextended their military with too many wars on too many frontiers. They had a bloated bureaucracy and a welfare state that demanded constant funding. But the emperors didn't have enough silver to pay the legions. They had a choice: cut spending and risk a revolt, or find a way to create money. They chose the latter. They decided to debase the currency. The denarius was the standard silver coin of the empire, the reserve currency of the ancient world. Emperor Nero began by reducing the silver purity to 90%. It seemed harmless at first, but successive emperors, desperate to pay their debts, kept lowering the quality. They mixed in copper, bronze, and cheaper metals. By the time the empire was collapsing, the silver coin contained only 5% silver. It was essentially a copper token with a thin silver wash that would rub off on your fingers. They created more coins to pay their debts, but the coins were worth less. The result was catastrophic inflation. The price of wheat in Egypt skyrocketed by thousands of percent. This destroyed the Roman middle class, wiped out savings, and shattered trust in commerce. The economy collapsed from the inside long before the barbarians kicked down the gates. Today, we don't clip coins or mix in copper. We use a more sophisticated method called quantitative easing. We click a button at the Federal Reserve and create digital currency out of thin air to buy government bonds. But the mechanism is identical. It is currency manipulation designed to fund the state at the expense of the currency holder. Since 2020, the M2 money supply, the total amount of money in circulation, exploded by nearly 40%. When you print 40% more money without creating 40% more goods and services, the value of each individual unit of currency must go down. The reason your groceries cost 30% more than they did 4 years ago isn't just corporate greed or supply chains. It is because your money has been diluted to pay for the debt. This is the hidden tax. Inflation is just a slow-motion default on the currency. If you want to understand the true history of money and how empires use inflation to steal wealth, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We are tracking these historical cycles and global economic shifts every single week. Click that subscribe button so you don't miss the next analysis. Let's look at a more terrifying example: 18th century France. Before the guillotine fell, France faced a sovereign debt crisis that mirrors ours almost perfectly. The French monarchy was drowning in debt. They had spent a fortune helping the Americans in their Revolutionary War, and the King's Court was burning cash on lavish palaces. By 1789, the interest payments on the French debt consumed half of the annual budget. The state was insolvent. To solve this, the new revolutionary government introduced a revolutionary idea, a new paper currency called the assignat. They claimed it was the safest money in the world because it was backed by the vast lands seized from the Catholic Church. It was asset-backed. At first, it worked. The liquidity injection jump-started the economy. People had money to spend. Business boomed. But like a drug addict, the government needed more. They couldn't stop spending. So they printed more assignats. And more. And more. As the supply of paper money doubled and tripled, its value plummeted. Merchants began hoarding goods because they didn't want to trade real bread for worthless paper. Bread prices skyrocketed. The government panicked. They responded by passing price control laws, the law of the maximum, making it illegal to sell bread above a certain price. This is a classic economic error. When you force prices down artificially while destroying the currency, producers stopped producing. Farmers stopped bringing food to the cities. The shelves went empty. Starvation set in. Hyperinflation took hold. In just a few years, the assignat became totally worthless. People burned them for heat. This economic collapse destroyed the social order and created a power vacuum that allowed a military dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte, to seize power. History teaches us a brutal lesson. When a nation's debt becomes unpayable, the government will sacrifice the currency to save the state. They will print the money needed to pay the nominal debt, even if it means destroying the savings of every citizen in the country. They choose inflation over default every single time. So, how does this end for the United States? We are the world's reserve currency, so surely we are different? Not necessarily. The laws of economics apply to everyone. There are really only two options left on the table. Option A, hard default. The US government admits it's broke. They stop sending out social security checks, stop paying interest on US Treasury bonds, and the global financial system instantly collapses. Banks fail, credit freezes, global trade halts. It would be a depression worse than the 1930s. No politician who wants to stay in power will ever choose this. Option B, soft default. This is the lie we talked about at the beginning. This is the path of least resistance. Economists call this financial repression. It is a strategy used to liquidate debt by keeping interest rates below the rate of inflation. Here is how the theft works. Let's say real inflation is running at 5% or 6%, but the government manipulates the bond market to keep interest rates at 3% or 4%. If you hold that bond, you are losing purchasing power every single year. You are getting paid back in dollars, but those dollars buy less than when you lent them. Every year this happens, the real value of the government's debt decreases. They are effectively burning the debt away by burning your purchasing power. Who are the victims? Who holds the debt? It's not just billionaires. It's pension funds. It's insurance companies. It's the Social Security Trust Fund. It's your 401k. The soft default means the debt is technically paid. The government doesn't bounce a check, but they pay you back with currency that has been gutted. They will pay back the $35 trillion, but by the time they do, that $35 trillion might only buy what $15 trillion buys today. They are transferring the debt from their balance sheet to your grocery bill. They are inflating the debt away at your expense. I don't tell you this to scare you. Fear is useless without action. I tell you this because understanding the game is the only way to win it. The debt doom isn't a single event that happens on a random Tuesday. It is a process. It is the slow, grinding erosion of your standard of living over a decade. If you are holding all your wealth in cash or long-term government bonds, you are the one paying off the national debt. You are the volunteer victim in this game. Historically, during periods of debt monetization and currency debasement, real assets, things that cannot be printed, tend to hold their value. We are talking about gold, silver, arable land, commodities, and businesses with strong pricing power. These are the lifeboats when the sea of paper money rises. The wealthy have already positioned themselves. They are moving out of currency and into assets. The $35 trillion number is not just a statistic to ignore. It is a mathematical certainty that the current financial paradigm is coming to an end. The debt cannot be paid in real terms. The only variable left is how fast the currency will be debased to cover it. The system relies on you not paying attention. It relies on you believing the lie that everything is under control. But now, you know the truth. You know the history. If you want to dive deeper into how this ends and what you can do about it, watch this video next where we break down exactly what happens during a currency reset. And if you found value in this analysis, hit the like button. It helps us get this information out to more people who need to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.